Beyond the Counter.
Inside the minds that shape medicine.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our very first episode of Beyond the Counter. My name is Mohammed Alazazi. I'm a PharmD candidate of 2027 at Long Island University, and I'm passionate about bringing you the stories of pharmacists whose career paths have gone, you guessed it, beyond the counter. I started this podcast to explore the journeys of pharmacists who've taken career paths beyond traditional practice. My goal here is simple: to bring you the stories, decisions, and opportunities that show just how diverse and exciting the pharmacy world can be. And I'm really excited to kick this initiative off with someone who embodies exactly this. I could not think of a better guest to launch this podcast with. He's a medical communications postdoctoral fellow at the Medical Knowledge Group and an adjunct faculty professor of drug information at Long Island University. He graduated from UNT Health Fort Worth in May 2024, where he received his PharmD. During pharmacy school, he completed an internship in global medical scientific affairs in oncology at Karyopharm Therapeutics. He also started his own industry-focused podcast as a student named the HSC at Fort Worth Industry Pharmacy Podcast, which actually played a really big role in inspiring me to start this very podcast. So it feels especially meaningful to have him here as my very first guest. So without further ado, please welcome Dr. Chinonye Madunezim.
Thanks for the introduction, Mohammed. It's a pleasure to be here. Especially, it's a good feeling to be on the other side of the interview for once. So I'm excited to get started.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I wanted to kick things off by going back to where it all began. What inspired you to pursue pharmacy?
Yeah, where it all began, that's a great question. Crazy enough, it kind of started with my parents. I actually wanted to pursue, I think it was like a hospital administration person or something like that. And my parents were like, nah, that's not the best route for you, because my parents had a lot of friends that were pharmacists. And my whole mindset was like, all right, if you guys are going to support me through it, finance me through it, then if I fail, it's y'all's fault, because I didn't want to do it. So, that was kind of the genesis of it. But once I actually started pharmacy school, during that first year of pharmacy school is when I realized that there's a lot of stuff to do in pharmacy school outside of just retail. And then that's when I really fell in love with the different opportunities that were in pharmacy school. So from there, it was just a roller coaster ride, and I was finally able to land, I guess find my passion for industry from my 4 years of pharmacy school.
Have you ever had retail experience as you were finding your passion for industry?
I actually didn't, which is pretty crazy. I thought that I would not be able to get into pharmacy school because I didn't have the experience, but it was during COVID year, so I think they were a little bit more lenient, and I was able to, get in without any experience.
So what exactly was that spark that guided you to the pharmaceutical industry?
Yeah, I think it was something that I had an interest in even early on during my first year of pharmacy school. Crazy enough, I think I applied for a leadership position in IPHO at our school. I actually didn't get it, which is crazy. I think I applied during my P1 year, which we call it P1. I think here it'll be P3 for you guys. So I always had an interest just because I realized that there was a lot to do in pharmacy. So I was kind of just trying to find my way, being involved in a lot of different organizations. I was involved in a infectious disease organization, ambulatory care chair for SSHP, as a P1. So just trying to find my footing. But it was once I got to my P3 year, during rotations, I began to interact with patients, but I guess sometimes seeing patients in a bad condition would kind of dawn on me, and maybe really consider like other options. So I also considered managed care as well. Had a managed care elective, and I did enjoy it. I learned a lot, but it kind of, showed me that maybe I should look elsewhere. Maybe I should, try to see what else was out there, go back to kind of my industry roots. And, I began to really pursue internships. Crazy enough, I interviewed for an internship, I think my third year of pharmacy school. Didn't get it though. And so, that was kind of the genesis of me having an interest in industry, just because it still allowed me to impact patients, but I didn't really have to be right next to the patient or see them in that bad condition. And so that was kind of the genesis for me pursuing industry pharmacy.
So you mentioned infectious disease, AmCare, and you also took an internship at Karyopharm Therapeutics in oncology. How was the internship like in oncology? And is that something you're passionate about, or were you more passionate about other therapeutic areas?
Yeah, it's a funny story. I feel like I gravitated towards the harder classes in school. So I like oncology, psych, I think it's psychology or psychiatric drugs is also one of my favorite classes. ID, all the classes that people would consider hard. And so, crazy enough, I think oncology was considered the hardest. And so once I landed an internship with Carrier Farm, again, this was like after I graduated, which is pretty rare to land an internship after you graduate. But having that experience with oncology really showed me that it's very complex. And I was really excited, to learn a lot. I mean, the internship was about 4 months. So it was kind of hard for me to become an expert in oncology, especially because the internship was on multiple myeloma and I think endometrial cancer, which were topics we didn't really dive deep into as a student. But I would say, if I could choose, oncology would always be, I guess, my top choice.
So you mentioned you were in the internship after you received your PharmD once you graduated. How did that play a role in your current fellowship in medical communications?
Yeah, it kind of takes me back. So crazy enough, I think P4 year after my rotation, I actually applied for fellowships. I think I did a really good job of planning where, even before fellowship season started, I was already reaching out to people. I knew an MSL, I knew fellows as well. And so, went through the fellowship process, end up with the final round interview, didn't work out. And so I was like truly devastated. And my next thought process was like, okay, like what do I do? I was just kind of doing anything I could to still land in the industry, whether it was through an entry level position, whether it was me going, the long route. And so I started to apply to internships. I was able to land this internship with Carrier Farm. And from there, it was kind of, an easier transition. So I kind of came into an internship with three plans. So plan A was to finish the internship and stay with the company, but that didn't work out. Plan B was to try to apply to other entry level roles that didn't work out. And so plan C was really just to run it back through the fellowship process, knowing that I had a lot more experience. I felt a lot more confident with the experience I had. And so it really showed me how important it is to land an internship during your pharmacy school career, just because it definitely gives you an advantage. I feel like, and I hope I'm not monologuing here, but I definitely feel like an internship really shows you if the industry pharmacy is really for you. So I think it's easy to get lost in, the things that you see, work from home, maybe for some positions and being able to travel. But I feel like there are certain skills as an industry pharmacist that aren't really learned in school. It's certain things you have to learn on your own. And so I think an internship gives you the opportunity to really, I guess, make mistakes and learn from your mistakes rather than, I guess, being thrown in where there's more pressure, more work and things like that. So that was kind of the story of how, me not getting a fellowship the first time around and then landing an internship with Carrier Farm led to me landing a fellowship with MKG.
Many students are struggling to get internships, let alone a fellowship. And you had the opportunity to do something a little different that's not as traditional and have an internship after you graduate. If a student is also presented with that opportunity, would you suggest they have an internship and make that a way into getting a fellowship, or would they instead just try getting a job from the get-go?
I think the timing really worked out for me because I think fellowship season or applications end around December. And even then, I think there are some fellowships that still have interviews in January. So this is still during time when you're on rotation, you're still in school. So you still have time. I think, especially when you're a student, I think it's really important, especially if you don't get a fellowship after December. I think it's really important to start reaching out to people because this is something I noticed people are more likely to respond when they see that you're a student. When you reach out to them on LinkedIn, let them know. Don't just cold call. Don't just reach out with no message, Like even me personally, if it's somebody from my alma mater, HSC, and they reach out with no message, I might just still let them in, but it helps when people, send a message. So if I was a student in that case, when I didn't land a fellowship, then I would definitely, start reaching out. Luckily, there are still a lot of avenues to get into industry. You can pursue residency, but it's a tight turnaround. Fellowship season ends around like mid-December, and then I think applications for residency are probably due in January. Crazy enough, I actually tried to apply for residency right after my fellowship. I guess the first time around, and that's when I realized, oh shoot, my residency application was ready. So I was kind of scrambling. And I guess that's why I started applying to anything. I was applying to internships, entry-level positions, reaching out to even managed care, because that was something that I really had a strong interest in. And I had a lot of experience in managed care throughout pharmacy school as well. And so I think that would be my advice is to, look at all avenues, start reaching back out to those connections that you develop over pharmacy school, make new connections as well, especially as a student. 'Cause, I mean, once you graduate and you don't have any industry experience, I think it's really hard. Obviously, I know people who didn't land it the first time and are going back through the fellowship process like I did, but I would say it's really hard.
Yeah, it sounds like it took a lot of unexpected turns to get where you were at, and it was a lot of effort and hard work. And I can only imagine the stress in the moments. I'm glad that it paid off and you landed the fellowship and experience to get that fellowship, and hopefully more opportunities will come its way. How was the time frame between the internship and the adjunct faculty professor position and the fellowship?
Yeah, that's a good question. So let's see. I knew I got the internship, I'd say around February of my P4 year is when I got that message in my email, which was like almost the best day of my life. So I got the email, and the email said that my internship would start. So it started almost as soon as I graduated. So I didn't really have a chance to, I guess, take the Naplex, um, or really study for it. And so I spent really, the internship was 4 months long. So it started like late May. And around that time, after I finished internship, I think I spent like a good month or so really just trying to apply to entry level positions. And I really got nowhere. Knowing what I know now, I probably would have had more success. But at that time, I guess there was a lot that I didn't know. And so I wasn't successful. And so I think around September, that's when fellowship season started to ramp up, Since I was unsuccessful with staying with the company post internship, decided to, why not run it back through the fellowship process? And so I spent, I think, that time from October to December going through the fellowship process again, feeling a lot more confident. And so December came around, felt confident, finally landed the fellowship. So now I was like, okay, what do I do with my time? Well, I started studying for the Naplex, right? Because I was still, landed the fellowship, but I didn't pass the Naplex, so I'm just chilling pretty much. So I decided to start studying for the Naplex. So I got everything around February is when I, passed everything the first time, got my results. And then from there, it's crazy. So I passed, and this is when I learned that timing is everything. Because even though I passed my NAPLEX and MPJ around February, it was really hard to find a job. I guess the timing, because they probably hire when school's out, so they probably do their most hiring around maybe May, June, that time frame. And so it really took me about a month and a half to actually find something. It was really, really nerve-wracking. But I guess I felt good because I knew I had that fellowship and I knew I had to move to New York. So I was like, okay, New York is expensive. I want to make a little bit more money on the side so I can actually enjoy it. And so I finally landed a job, I think, in April. And then I worked in retail for 4 months. And then that's when my fellowship started, I think, in July. And so crazy enough, a lot of the experiences in retail, well, I feel like the stress that you have in retail is kind of similar to the stress you have as an industry pharmacist, but you don't have to deal with customers as much. But you're still, being pulled in different directions, having to focus on multiple things at once. And so that's one thing I think people don't like that I realized since I had that retail experience.
A lot of people undermine the stress behind retail pharmacy, and I think you said it really well, that if you're able to handle the stress of retail, you could probably handle everything, whether it's hospital or industry. So I like the way you worded that. And you spoke about taking your Naplex a little later. So I know people who are in the pharmaceutical industry and do not take the Naplex right away because it's not necessarily needed. And that could attract some students to the pharmaceutical industry, like, oh, I don't have to study for the Naplex. What are your thoughts behind delaying the Naplex? Do you recommend delaying it or taking it right away?
Man, that's a tough question. See, I think I have a really weird way of looking at things. Everyone says, oh, the earlier you take it, the better your chances are. But maybe I'm giving bad advice. So I just want to say that this may be bad advice before someone actually takes it. But I have the opinion that the reason why the results are so high when you take it initially because the people who are taking it earlier are probably the residents. So it's like they're already probably some of the smartest kids in their school. They want to do residency, so it's heavily clinical based. So that's why, the scores are skewed higher when you take it earlier. And I mean, obviously you remember it more. So I think that may play a role as well. But for me, I guess I just knew how to study for it. I felt like I studied like a doctor almost because I went to school at a health science center. And so I would see a lot of the MD students or DL students just always studying. Like that's all they did 24/7. So that's kind of what I did. Like in my car, I was studying just constantly nonstop. And I felt like I was the smartest I've ever been when I took the Naplex. And so I feel like it depends on how you study. If you are a really good student, then I think you shouldn't have a problem. But I think if you probably weren't the best student, then I think it might be best to take it early just because you're more motivated and you may have more people that are taking it with you. And so that can help you when it comes to, being disciplined and, studying early and because it is a grind for sure. And so I think having someone to study with definitely helps out.
It's very daunting as well. And I loved your answer because it's just opened a new perspective that I've never heard before. I've heard that taking it early is better because it helps with the memory stuck in your brain. I've heard that the Naplex itself, it's easier in the like June, July. Like the content itself is easier. And I've heard that like studying more is better. So it's like it adds another perspective. Like essentially the nerds take it in June.
Yeah, that's true. Oh yeah, that makes sense. Especially
It's really
because
crazy.
some companies, some retail companies want you to be licensed by a certain date, so that's extra stress. So that's a good point.
So you took the Naplex and time passed and you landed your fellowship. Congratulations. How does a day-to-day look like in your medical communications postdoctoral fellowship?
Yeah, so no day's the same. I think it helps to kind of explain how my fellowship works. So my fellowship is with the medical agency. So that just means that we work with different pharmaceutical companies. I can't say who, but some large, some
Mhm.
small. And pretty much the way that works is if a pharmaceutical company is too busy, then they send us some of that work to help them out. I've worked on a lot of different things, but since I'm in medical communications, it mainly focuses on building slide decks. I have had some experience with dealing with insights from congresses, creating slide deck for MSL team. Also, it's pretty cool because I get to see, especially with these smaller companies that I've probably never heard of, but I get to see what's in the pipeline. And I've seen something that's pretty cool. I can't say what it is, but it's really cool. Let's see, I can't say too much, but um, first thing is check with my manager. If there's anything new. Crazy thing about my fellowship is that there's really no time to rest. So I actually finished a project, I think, on Monday. And my mindset was like, okay, we're finished. The holidays in like 3 days. I might get to chill. I think early in the morning, my manager messages me like, hey, are you done with this project? Whatever. I'm like, yeah, it's complete. He says, all right, perfect. Here's another one that I need your help with. So it's just like back to back to back, which I like though. I like staying busy. And so that's one thing I like about the whole fellowship is that at least my fellowship is no day is the same. There's so much to do, so many different therapeutic areas to work in as well.
So there's this common perspective. A lot of students think pharmaceutical industry is the way to go. Day to day, it's going to be much easier than residency or retail, and you have much more free time. Do you agree with that way of thinking, or do you think the workload is still there, but just different?
One thing I really like about industry is, as I guess compared to retail, I'm not sure how hospital is, but with retail, you would come in, you just didn't know, unless like yesterday was bad and you got a lot of phone calls, and coming in the next morning might be tough. But with retail, for the most part, you don't really, I feel like you can know if you've worked there long enough where certain days are more packed, but just in general, you don't really know what to expect. But with industry pharmacy, at least for me, I feel like I can control a lot of how the day looked. So actually, I think last week I stayed up till like I think 1 a.m. on a Thursday just because I wanted my Friday to be easy, and it was easy. So sometimes, if you work past that 9 to 5, the next day could be easier depending on how much work you have. And even with industry pharmacy, sometimes you have a conference season. So we work with clients that may either be in conference season or they may have gotten a new drug approved. And so that can be very busy. Crazy enough, when I started my fellowship, I got kind of thrown in because the first client I worked with had their drug approved. And so it all just depends. But that's one thing I like is that you can kind of gauge and control how much time you have. And so um, I wouldn't say you have a lot of free time, but it kind of depends. I feel like there's always work to do though.
Are most of your drugs that you work with are in the market? in phase 4, or do you work with any other phases?
Yeah, some are in the market, some approved. So yeah, I'm kind of all over the place. And then the projects I work on aren't always the same. So it varies.
Without saying too much, because I know there's a lot of confidential information, what would you say it's you enjoy the most? Working with a drug that's in the market already, something at phase 3, or is it no difference?
Ooh, that's tough. That's tough. I think working on something that is in phase 3, it's hard to gauge because the project that I worked on for the drug that was in phase 3 was a lot more, it was kind of what you would call a scientific platform. So it was mainly creating a slide deck, and the slide deck was a beast, man. It was like 100 slides. But it was mainly, and of course I had help with it, but it was mainly trying to outline or talk about what drugs are currently out there and the current position of that drug and just trying to, yeah, just do a lot. It was a lot. I think working with the phase 3 drug was a lot more work, and it's a better experience for me just to have that big project under my wing. I think the project that with the drug that was already approved was it only took me probably 2 days. I think 2 or 3 days to finish it. But this project took about like 2 weeks. It was a lot.
Sounds like a lot of work too, 2 weeks for one project. Would you say that's a long project, or would you say that's just a typical average project?
2 weeks for a project. So I would say that's my longest project I've had. Everything else has been finished in about, I think, a week's time. So yeah, I think that 2 week project was probably the longest one. Crazy enough, like I finished all my stuff. It was a team project where I had help as well with other slides. And so I finished all my stuff in 2 weeks, but there's still other team members that have other things that they need to finish. And so it's kind of longer than 2 weeks, but I know I finished my part.
You spoke a lot about slide decks. Is that your primary role? Is there any writings or phone calls or meetings, or is it just slide decks?
So far, it's been slide decks. I do anticipate being able to attend advisory boards. There was one project where I got to see a KOL meeting and collect insights from that meeting. For the most part, yeah, my projects are mainly slide decks and searching through the literature, making sure everything's accurate, interpreting the literature, and pretty much telling a story, which is something I'm getting better at. So yeah, that's kind of my day to day.
What skills would you believe is most essential to contribute to being a successful PharmD in medical communications?
That's tough. I think it takes a lot of skills. Yeah, I thought about this. I think the biggest one that helps me out a lot, I think, is being proactive or adaptable can be used interchangeably, but I can give like some examples, right? So I think with this project that I worked on, that was about 2 weeks long. It probably could have been done maybe a day sooner. And it was my first time working on this project. One thing I realized was to always save an older version of what you created, just because there's so much back and forth. Sometimes a change can be made, and I'm kind of at the bottom of the team. And so everything I do gets sent up a ladder pretty much. So there's my manager, then there's like the VP, and then the president. He checks off on it before it gets sent to a client. And sometimes I'll work on something, and then it's funny, the story happened. I worked on something, and my manager was like, oh, let's change this. And then I changed it, and then it got sent to the VP, and she's like, oh, let's change it back to this. I'm like, wait a second, that's what I had initially. And so, I had to kind of go back and restart over. But if I would have always saved, I guess I learned to always save an older version of what I created, at least until the project's completed and sent off, just because it'll allow me to be more efficient and be quicker if we decide to, backtrack. So that's being proactive, but also adaptable at the same time.
I like that because if you're proactive, you would plan ahead on possible changes, which also constitutes you being adaptable as well. Speaking of constant changes, that's something that the pharmaceutical industry is known for. Can you elaborate on how the pharmaceutical industry is constantly changing?
That's a loaded question. There's a lot of changes because, sometimes you'll send something to the VP for approval and they may not like what they see and they'll send you a whole bunch of things to change. So I think that's a challenge that I've noticed is trying to put that best foot forward. No matter what, you can do your perfect slide, but their interpretation is a higher level because they're sending it direct to the client. And so they interact with the client more. And so that's kind of the challenge is putting that best effort forward. At least for me personally, I try to finish things pretty quickly just because I know it's coming back. Like no matter how that I do, I know it's coming back. And so I try to finish it quickly, but still make it good. So I'm trying to find that balance where when it does come back, I'm not overwhelmed. I still have time to work on other projects, but I can, still implement some of their feedback. So I think those are the biggest changes I see, at least on my team. As far as in the broad general scope of things, pharmacy industry is tough. There's a lot of things they don't tell you. Job security is you're not always standing on the solid ground. If that makes sense. It's crazy. I kind of like that. Like I like having that pressure, knowing that I have to perform, that, no day is guaranteed. It makes you appreciate it more. And it makes me, I guess, up my game. I feel like that's kind of what I need to up my game is something that lingering thought that, tomorrow I may not be able to work with this company. Obviously, I'm in a fellowship, so it's a contract, but other positions are not as guaranteed. And so with pharmacy industry, the changes, there are a lot of changes when it comes to companies trying to be more efficient and downsize and, um, save money. And so that's something that people should be aware of when they come into industry pharmacy. But based on what I've seen, like most people are able to still land a job after some time in industry.
Thank you. That was a very loaded question and broad when
Yeah.
it comes to change. But to narrow down change, has there been a moment during your fellowship where your perspective changed or you noticed a misconception that you had before the fellowship where you thought, oh, this is new. I didn't know medical communications was like this.
I think it kind of goes back to that statement I made about retail pharmacy and having that same amount of stress. I don't know if it's just me, but I am really a very gung ho person. Like as soon as I get a project, I'm excited. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to take off. But I've realized that it helps to slow down and really think. Like I have to actually like slow down and like time myself. Like, all right, it's just, sit and let this marinate for a second. And that's when I realized, okay, I get more questions that, come to me and actually helps me become more proactive when I just sit and, think about the project for a while instead of just, being excited that I got a new project, So I guess I like finishing things. I like finishing project and moving to one project to the other. I realized that it's better to take your time because this is actually where I would find a lot of mistakes when I would rush into a project and, be excited to finish it. And so I've noticed that I've gotten a lot more efficient with my work and it's been more perfect when I slow down and be more detail oriented. So I think you asked me a question about what skill is useful. Again, there's a lot of skills, teamwork, being proactive, but being detail oriented is also super critical because this is something, at least for my fellowship, we work on projects that are going to a client and the client is paying us. So they want things to look a certain way. So, last thing you want is to finish something and then send it up to your director and they're like, oh, you missed something here. So that's something that is definitely an important skill is being detail oriented. And it's something I really improved upon as well. Even before I started with MKG, I was working with Dr. Nathan for the drug information part of the fellowship.
As when you're working as an adjunct faculty professor, was that tied with the same fellowship with Medical Knowledge Group, or was that its own independent experience?
So it is part of the fellowship, but they kind of occur at separate times. So the first 3 months of my fellowship, I really spent at LIU Brooklyn under Dr. Nathan. I actually didn't work with MKG until October. So really, I've only been with MKG for about 2 months and I've already undertaken a lot of projects, but it was different. But I do feel like the skills and the projects I did while I was with, and I'm still obviously with Dr. Nathan because I still have to teach every Monday, but I feel like the skills that I learned during the LIU portion of my fellowship were still very crucial. And I still use them now. During my time at MKG.
Thank you. Let's say there's a student, they're really interested in medical communications, that's their passion. What would you tell them would constitute someone who does not fit into that role?
So you turned it around there.
Yeah, exactly. So how would someone know this is not for me?
So yeah, let me try to answer it, and then because I think I know what you're saying. I think that's a really good question. I like the way you flipped it around, by the way. If you are someone who doesn't like changes, because there is a lot of back and forth where sometimes it feels like you'll work on something, you put in a lot of effort, but it'll never be perfect. So you have to kind of be someone that is adaptable, right? You have to be someone that is open to feedback, open to getting better. I think that's the biggest thing is really And that's kind of another reason why I chose industry pharmacy, because that opportunity to learn the skill, master it, move on to the next skill. You can add a lot of, skills as an industry pharmacist. And there's a lot of growth as well. So I think if you're not someone that is willing to grow, it could be very hard just because the amount of work you're given and the different projects you're given, you don't really learn them in school. And so you don't have a choice but to grow. Sometimes you have to figure it out. You have to, you know, learn on the fly, try to be proactive, try to save time, try to be efficient. There's a lot of adjustments that need to be made. I've even seen adjustments in myself, but I think it's very rewarding. One things that I really like to, because I'm a person that reflects a lot. And one thing that I like to say is that I'm not the same person I was like a year ago, even 2 months ago, just because I've evolved and I've changed. And, I think that's an exciting thing to see, is that something that you struggle with maybe a month ago or, even 2 weeks ago, you've mastered it now. And this is something I remember telling a student, like the struggle is beneficial. Like, I don't mind putting in the long hours because like I know I'm not going to be in the same spot. I know this situation is never going to happen again because I'm going to learn from my mistakes. So I think that's something that is very important to be, you know, willing to adapt, willing to change your way of thinking, to take correction and really become an industry pharmacist.
I love that you said open to feedback, because if you're open to feedback or open to criticism and you accept it or invite it, your potential goes above the roof. Your max potential just increases at exponential rate. And that is very ideal in the pharmaceutical industry, and not just as a professional in the industry, as a student or even your personal relationships. So that's something I really relate to. And I appreciate that you gave advice regarding being open to feedback. Speaking of students, if you were a student, let's say you had a time machine, you go back for being a P1 or P3, what is one thing you would change, whether it's adding something or removing something that you would do differently?
Absolutely nothing. No, I'm joking.
No, with no regrets.
I wish, I wish. It's really hard to say, like, because everything works out. Like, even me being in New York, like, this whole journey has been more than could have imagined. And it came through some failures. So it's really hard, but I think I would have to say asking for more help, because there was a point in time where when I initially started the fellowship process, I had a lot of help. And as I began to progress, that's when I kind of ventured off on my own. Crazy enough, it's funny. The first time I went through the fellowship process, had a lot of help at the beginning, and really I kind of went off on my own at the end. Second time around, I kind of did things on my own at the beginning, but I make sure I got help once I got to like the final rounds. But the first time around, I did kind of venture off on my own, and it's funny because once I didn't land the fellowship, I actually had a podcast guest. She was like, "Oh, you should have reached out to me during the fellowship process. Maybe it wasn't going to be guaranteed, but you would have done her part to, you know, support me and land that fellowship." That was the biggest thing, is just asking for more help um, throughout the whole duration of the fellowship process.
You helped me with one of my articles in your time at Long Island University. And when you said that, like, just reminded me that our first communication was through that article you were helping me with. And I reached out to you on help with a podcast. And honestly, this very podcast would probably not be going on right now if it wasn't for your advice and what you taught me. And speaking of the podcast, what made you say, "Hey, I want to start a podcast"?
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest though. The podcast wasn't like originally my idea. It was brought up to me by an advisor, but I was the only one that really, taken and ran with it. Initially, it was supposed to be like a team kind of podcast, but we were talking in the summer, but once school starts, everyone gets busy. So I was kind of left alone, but I was someone that I like taking on new challenges. It was something I was passionate about because, I went to school in Texas. And so being in Texas, there aren't many drug companies that are out here. And so it's kind of harder to land an internship for the most part. Some people still do, kudos to them, but I think it takes a lot more effort. And so, I was someone that was passionate in the industry, especially because I had like interviewed for multiple internships and I didn't land them. And so, I definitely wanted to help people out and help people out that would be in my shoes, because I think I started the podcast as a third year pharmacy student. And I know that if the podcast was around when I was a first year pharmacy student, I think landing internship would have been a lot easier. And so that was kind of the motivation behind it. And so I started on my own, but I guess, and this is kind of just me being adaptable. Once I started to get a few episodes, that's when I started to recruit other people, other members of IPHO to help out, just because I knew that it could really help with the podcast as well, having different voices and having different guest speakers. But yeah, that was kind of the motivation behind it.
That's really relatable. And I like how you asked for help because you were just talking about asking for help. What's your biggest advice you have for me or any other students who are listening who want to start a podcast?
I think the biggest advice is have a strong why, because there were times when I would have to sacrifice. Sometimes weekends I would be spending learning how to do the podcast, but it's a new skill. It's pretty cool. It's very unique. I think it can help you stand out, especially because as a student, there aren't really too many things that translate to industry experience. But taking on a project such as a podcast, because there are so many different things that are involved, like I mentioned before, initially it was supposed to be a team project, and I end up doing it solo just because everyone else is busy. That's something that can happen in the industry setting, where other team members are too busy to help out. So I think having a strong why, that was kind of my why, was like, this is a project, especially being in Texas, not many internship experiences that you can do as a student. I feel like this could really translate well, just having a project management skill, especially since I felt like it was a long-term project. And also, one thing I really enjoyed was looking at the analytics. And so that can be a useful industry skill. And what I mean by analytics is I would purposely post the podcast episode or make an announcement about it on different platforms. And I would just watch them over time and try to understand when's a good time to make another post about it. And it was really cool to, see the trends and how they increase. And finally, we got to a point where the numbers were consistent. We were able to create a good amount of episodes where we were having a good amount of listeners per month. And so, again, having a strong why, because there are some days where you might have to sacrifice for it, but I think it's definitely all worth it, once it all comes together.
What soft skills do you think it's really important when it comes to managing a podcast?
For soft skills when it comes to magic. Ooh, that's a good one. I think multitask would be, I don't know if that's a soft skill, but that's one thing I noticed, or teamwork, right? Because when I would do a podcast by myself, it was so hard to try to ask a question, actively listen, come up with a better question based on their answer. And so, when I would be doing interviews, I would actually stutter a lot because my brain is like in three different places. I'm reading the question I want to ask, making sure it's, in the right place at the right time. But once I had other people with me in the room, that's when I realized like my questions got better because while they were talking, it gave me time to relax and just focus on one or two things at a time. And so that's allowed me to, ask better questions. So I think that's, teamwork, I guess being able to multitask too are helpful. I think doing the podcast definitely increased my active listening skills because I always want the podcast to be interesting. So I would try to think of either, good questions to ask before the interview and then also good question to ask during the interview based on the responses of the guests. And so, yeah, kind of a long-winded answer, but I think those are some good skills to have.
So you mentioned how one of the most difficult issues was time management when it comes to starting a podcast or when it comes to starting anything really, especially as a pharmacy student. Do you have any advice when it comes to what's best to manage times as a pharmacy student so you can manage other projects?
I think one thing I learned was the summer is like your best friend because we first thought about the podcast in the summertime and I really spent the summertime and it wasn't a lot, a lot of times, I don't know how it is in New York, but in Texas, we get a pretty lengthy summer break. And I probably spent like a week or so just like focused on the podcast. And I spent the rest obviously winding down. So it helps to have a balance. You don't want to just burn yourself out. And luckily, the podcast was a long-term project. So we were working on it for about 2 years. And I think that's a lot of time to, fix things up, learn how to do the podcast. And I think we were producing episodes maybe once every 2 months or something like that. So I think when you first start off, that's probably the most time-consuming part of it. As you continue moving forward, you find ways to get better and you find ways to get more efficient. And so you do have a lot of time. You just have to, I guess, use it wisely.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So you manage a podcast, you were a pharmacy student, we had an internship, or in a medical communications fellowship. What is your strongest skill? Not necessarily just for the podcast, that you believe helps you push through all of those roles? And also, how can someone who lacks that skill, how can we improve in that?
Ooh, let's see. It's tough. I think going back to being adaptable, probably the strongest soft skill. I wish you had a list, but that's like the only one I could think of off the top of my head is really being adaptable. And I think it really comes from just a lot of self-reflection. It's kind of crazy. Like my whole personality comes from a class I took when I was an undergrad called Evolution. I fell in love with this class. Crazy enough, like I loved it so much that I told the professor that I liked it. She was like, "Oh, there's a research opportunity available, and they pay such and such." So like it got me paid just because I liked it so much. And I guess the biggest takeaway was animals go through evolution, but humans are evolving as well. So that was kind of my mindset, like, okay, I need to evolve, I need to constantly evolve. And I realized that especially when you take on a fellowship, you don't really have a choice. Like you have to evolve because it's a new experience, and obviously everyone wants to do well, but it's something that you've probably never seen before unless you've done an internship. But even then, a fellowship is a little bit more work. So, just having a mindset to improve, and I guess I take pleasure in looking back because I do a lot of self-reflection. I take pleasure in looking back and seeing that I'm not in the same place I was before, and things are easier now. And I guess that's something I learned throughout my time at pharmacy school. Like, I think pharmacy school is the time to struggle so that you learn how to deal with stress, how to deal with failures, right? Because once you get in the real world, I don't know if I can call a fellowship a real world, but once you advance in your career, the room you have for error becomes less and less. But it's good to have those experiences where you know how to react, if you're stressed out or if you get corrected or if you mess up on something.
Can someone who lacks adaptability or someone who struggles with being open to feedback or adaptability, how can we improve in that?
Yeah, so you have to take some time to do some self-reflection. As a student, you have to, do a lot of self-reflection, which is something I do. Like I wake up and before I even hop on Instagram or anything, I'm just like thinking about what mistakes did I do yesterday, what things can I do better today. And so sometimes, just doing even 5 minutes of just self-reflection, just focusing on how you can improve. I think it's something that students can do to start off. And then as you do it consistently, that's when, I think the brain is pretty unique that it evolves. And so I think once you start doing it consistently, then you'll get better at it and you'll see improvements. So I think doing some self-reflection definitely helps.
Thank you. And
Of course.
speaking of evolution, you have to be open to feedback to evolve or to develop yourself as a person.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you so much, Dr. Madunezim, for sharing your journey, your insights, and advice. I know I will benefit, and everyone who's listening, especially students, will benefit. And if there's a student who wants to contact you or reach out to you, what's the best way they can do so?
LinkedIn is the best way. I'm very open to students, especially if they send like a message. It doesn't have to be, even just saying, "Hi, my name is this and this." That's like enough for me because it's like, all right, I can respond to that. But if you send a message or you just connect with me on LinkedIn and there's no message, it has me wondering like, hey, what do they want? So just a message, even just saying I'm interested in pharmacy industry or I heard the podcast episode, would like to learn more. I'm pretty responsive to those. So I'm on LinkedIn for sure.
And what do you say to message everyone you connect with?
Yeah, that's what I do. Like sometimes I don't get a response back, but I've done my part. Even just learn how to be better with LinkedIn. I feel like there's a way to navigate it. I feel like I've gotten pretty good at it. So yeah, always, always, always send a message when you connect.
Thank you so much, Dr. Madunezim, for joining us today and sharing your experiences. We really appreciate your time, and hopefully we'll have you here again for season 2.
Hey, that'd be cool.
Thank you so much.